Hey guys, Randy Canales here. Thank you so much for tuning into this video where I'm going to be explaining the 1 to 4 family contract. So let's go ahead and dive right into this little webinar here. Okay, so this is going to be the 1 to 4 family residential contract. This is a resale contract. So this is not going to be the same contract if you're buying a new construction property. If you're buying a new construction property, typically for the most part, I'm going to say 9 out of 10 times the builder will always use their own contracts in that situation. Or if you're buying a condo, then we're going to be using a different contract than this one. So this contract that you're looking at right here, the 1 to 4 family residential contract, is going to be the standard contract that we use here in Texas for all properties that are single family homes and also townhomes as well. If the townhome is classified as a condominium, then that will be a different contract as well. But for the most part, most of the properties are going to fall under this contract here. The condominium contract is actually going to be very similar to this contract here. It's going to be a little bit different, but pretty similar for the most part. So we're going to go ahead and break down this contract here. I'm not going to go word for word on every single paragraph here. That will take a very long time. And another thing too is I'm not an attorney, and I don't plan on being an attorney. I don't plan on, or I don't play an attorney either. So I do advise you to, if you have any legal question, to always consult an attorney. When it comes to reading legal documents, this is a full binding legal document. I could explain this contract to the best of my abilities. I've been working with this contract for nearly a decade already, so I understand it for the most part very, very well. And I could explain to you, but of course, it's not going to be. I'm not going to cover every single word here. We're not going to cover every single paragraph in full 100% detail. So in that case, I do hope for you to read the contract yourself if you have any questions, and if you still have any legal questions, to consult an attorney. With that being said, let's go ahead and get started here. I'm going to make my screen a little bit bigger so you guys can actually see these words. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start with the top here. Now, this is just an example. As you can see here, starting with paragraph 1 here where it says parties, we have Ice Cube as our seller and Snoop Dogg as our buyer in this situation. Snoop Dogg and Ice Cube are definitely not buying a property from each other as far as I know, and it's definitely not on 123 Fake Street. So this is just an example. But let's go ahead and get started, and starting off here with the top. So under paragraph 1 where it says parties, as I just explained, simply just states who the seller is and who the buyer is. Again, the seller in this example is Ice Cube, and the buyer is Snoop Dogg. And paragraph 2 here, paragraph 2A, you see this is going to be the legal description of the property. So this is the full legal description of the property as you would see on the county records. So as you can see here, they have lot, block, and subdivision. So in this example, we're doing lot 1, block 2, subdivision of Compton, and city of Houston, and the county of Harris. And the address is 123 Fake Street, 77099. So if you move down here just a little bit, paragraph 2B here, where it says improvements, and we'll go ahead and go over this real quickly, but this just basically states what's going to be all included in the property and explains what a permanently installed fixture or built-in item is here. So let's go ahead and start. The house, the garage, all other fixtures and improvements attached to the above described real property, including without limitation the following permanently installed and built-in items, if any: all equipment and appliances, valances, screens, shutters, awnings, wall-to-wall carpeting, mirrors, ceiling fans, attic fans, mailbox, television, antennas, mounts and brackets for television and speakers, heating and air conditioning units, security, fire detection equipment, wiring, plumbing, lighting, fixture, chandeliers, water softener, fire detection equipment, and wiring, plumbing, lighting, fixture, chandeliers, water soft, yada 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 yada. Okay, so you guys can read all that. Basically, to put that all in a nutshell, anything that is fixed into the property, anything that is nailed into the property with the with a screw, anything that's considered a fixture, like a ceiling fan, of course, is considered a fixture. The one thing here that I do want to kind of point out where it says the television antennas. So like if there's a satellite dish on the roof, that's going to be included with the property. TV brackets. So if there's a flat screen TV on the wall, the bracket that's holding up the TV is going to be staying with the property, but the actual TV itself is not going to be included. But if the speakers are mounted into the ceilings, then those speakers will be included. The TV itself won't be included, but the TV brackets will be included, if that makes sense. Now, you can always go and ask the seller if you're a buyer in this situation. So this contract, by the way, we use this contract for buyers and sellers. And whenever we're making an offer on a property, this is the contract that we use to make an offer. This is also the contract, once it's fully signed, it actually becomes a full binding purchase contract. So with that being said, back to what I was saying, the television brackets would be included in that situation, but not the actual TV. If you want the TV to be included, then there's a separate addendum for that. We'll go through this later on here in the video, but there's a separate addendum to ask for non-realty items. So a non-realty item is something that's not included with the properties. It's considered a non-fixture. Like a TV is a non-fixture. Another example would be, maybe there's some furniture you want to include in your offer, things like that. That would be considered non-realty. Okay, so now let's go ahead and move on here to paragraph 2C, where it talks about accessories. So the following described related accessories, if any. So window air conditioning units, the stove, fireplace, screens, curtains and rods, blinds, window shades, draperies, rods, door keys, mailbox keys, above ground pool, swimming pool equipment, maintenance accessories, artificial fireplace, logs, and controls for the garage, the entry gates, and other improvements and accessories. So all these accessories are also going to be included in the property as well. But again, these are accessories; these are not fixtures here. But these items will be included. Now, paragraph 2D down here where it says exclusions, this is where they will have anything here where anything that's going to be excluded from the property. So let's go ahead and read this real quick. It says exclusions: the following improvements and accessories will be retained by the seller and must be removed prior to delivery of possession, which basically just means that these items are going to be taken out of the property before you close on it and you take possession of the property, if you're the buyer in this situation here. So that would be anything from, things that the seller doesn't want to leave with the property. So this could be, perhaps there's a chandelier that the seller really wants to keep, so they would put in here chandelier, as an example. Or another example could be, maybe perhaps there's a built-in computer desk that the seller wants to have removed for whatever reason, but it's built in, which means it's an actual fixture, so they'll have to place that here. So be in mind and make sure you look at this paragraph on the actual contract that I'll be sending you, if there's anything here listed in the exclusions. Okay, so paragraph 3 here. This is one of the most important, the most important paragraph here, which is the actual price. What are you buying the property for, or what are you selling the property for? So we're going to actually work these three numbers here a little backwards here. So paragraph 3C is a sales price. This is the price that that the seller and the buyer agreed to selling the property for. In this situation with Ice Cube and Snoop Dogg, they've agreed to sell the property for $250,000. Snoop Dogg is going to be getting financing done on this property, which is why you see the third-party financing addendum box here checked. So Snoop Dogg here is going to be financing. He's going to be doing a conventional 5% down loan. So 5% of $250,000 is $12,500. So that's going to be the cash portion of the sales price, payable by the buyer at closing, which is Snoop Dogg in this example. And the actual amount that's going to be financed, the loan amount, is going to be $237,500. So hopefully that makes sense. Pretty simple and straightforward. Paragraph 4 here is license holder disclosure. You really don't have to worry about this. This is just a disclosure. If the seller of the property who's selling the property has a real estate license that's here in Texas, then that seller has to disclose that they have a real estate license. Or if the buyer who's buying the property also has a real estate license, then you just have to disclose here that the buyer who's buying the property also has a real estate license. But again, in most situations, this won't even apply. This is a little bit more of a rare thing. But if the seller is a licensed real estate agent, or if the buyer is a licensed real estate agent, then that will be disclosed in this little paragraph 4 here. Paragraph 5, where it says earnest money. another super important paragraph. This is going to be the amount of money that the buyer has to put into escrow, into the title company, in order to basically enforce this contract here. So in this situation here, we put $2,500 as the earnest money. If you're not aware of what earnest money is, you could basically think of it as a deposit, basically. And this $2,500 is going to be held in escrow at the title company until closing. And then at closing, that $2,500 is going to be refunded back to the buyer at closing, and they're going to credit to them to their closing cost. If the property doesn't close for whatever reason, let's say the buyer backs out and it's within the contract that they're legally able to back out without any repercussions, and that $2,500 will be refunded to the buyer. If they're backing out of the contract and they don't have a contingency to back out of the contract, then the earnest money in that situation will be turned into the seller, where the seller will actually be able to keep it in that situation. So if you have any questions regarding this, make sure you shoot me an email and let me know. But for the most part, this contract, as overall, not just paragraph 5 here, the earnest money, but this whole entire contract here protects the seller just as much as it protects the buyer. There's no overbearing power over one or the other. This contract is really designed to protect both parties as much as possible. So that's what that is there. So the earnest money in this situation is $2,500. And we're going to start here where it says as earnest money to title company person. So usually this is going to be a person here. This is going to be a person's name. The actual title company representative, escrow officer's name is going to be here. So that will be there. And then the title company's address will go here. In this situation, it's 281 Fake Street, Houston, Texas 77099. But the actual real address of the title company will go into this box here. These rest of these boxes here, these blanks here, will for the most part remain blank in most situations. You don't have to really worry about these. If these are filled out, then I could go into further detail on what that actually means. But for the most part, this is exactly what it's going to look like on the contract that you're probably going to be looking at pretty soon here, or within the near future. So let's go ahead and move on to paragraph 6 here, title policy and survey. So the title policy, in 99% of the time, I'll say 9 out of 10 times, the title policy is going to be paid by the seller at closing. So as you can see here in this example, it says title policy, seller shall furnish to buyer at seller's expense and owner's title policy insurance issued by title company name. So whatever the title company that we're going to be closing at, whether it's StarTex Title, Capital Title, American Title, I mean, you name it, there's tons of them. The name of that title company is going to be listed right here. Now, as we go into a little bit of this here, furthermore in paragraph 6, I would really highly advise you to read this on your own. We don't have to go into all the particulars, into all this other stuff here. If you have any questions about these other ones, please let me know. But for the most part, this is not a whole lot of things that are too important to kind of go over here in this little short video. I'm trying to keep this video here as short as possible. That way it's not a very long and drawn out contract or long drawn out video. As you can see here, we're just on page 2 of 10 so far, and there's actually a few more pages past page 10 here that we're going to go over as well that are addendum. So, but if you have any questions here on paragraph 6, any of these numbers here, please let me know. But for the most part, like I mentioned before, this is all standard stuff, nothing really crazy or out of the ordinary. So paragraph B here just talks about the title commitment. Title commitment. The title company is going to issue a title commitment to us. You're going to get an email copy of that. That's basically just going to state if there's any liens on the property and basically what it's going to take to clear up the title. And that's what that title commitment is for. So you'll get that email to you usually within a couple of days, not 20 days here. But the title company will email that over to you, just letting you know that there's what liens are currently on the property, and of course, at closing, all those liens will be paid off. You're going to get a full, free and clear title that the title company is going to issue you a commitment on. So paragraph C here, it talks about survey. So so during the sales process, usually within 2 weeks or so, or sometimes a little bit earlier than that, there's going to be a survey that's going to either be ordered or there's going to be an existing survey that we can use that the seller may already have. So the seller currently has a survey that we can use, then that's fine as long as the title company looks over it, reviews it, and makes sure that it meets their compliance. then that'll be perfect. If there's no existing survey, or if the survey doesn't meet the compliance of the title company, then we do have to order a new survey. In this little example here, we have checkbox 1 here marked, which basically just states, within 14 days after the effective date of this contract, seller shall furnish to buyer and title company seller's existing survey. It says here, if seller fails to furnish the survey or the affidavit within the time prescribed, buyer shall obtain a new survey, seller's expense. So there's different boxes here. It could either be an existing survey. It could be as a paragraph 2 here, or checkbox 2 here. Basically just states that the buyer is going to obtain a survey at the buyer's expense. And checkbox 3 here just states that the seller will provide the buyer the survey to the property at the seller's expense. So just keep in mind, see which box here is checked, but this is just stating basically how the survey will be delivered and how it's going to be ordered and who pays for it. Now we're going to move down here to let's see here. We're going to move down here to paragraph 6D here, where it says objections. So 6D is basically just going to state any objections that you may want to put in here. For the most part, this is always just going to basically say residential dwelling. We could edit this to say something else. For example, you plan on using the property. You plan on using maybe part of it as a business, or you want to run a business out of there. We could put that the property, subject to being approved for a business, or for a business to run out of the property. But for the most part, we just have this as residential dwelling. That really doesn't get changed. But objections basically just states, buyer may object in writing to defects, exceptions, or encumbrances to title disclosed on the survey, other than items listed through here's what I want to read right here. But buyer must object the earlier of the closing date or 5 days before buyer receives the commitment, exception documents, and the survey. So once you receive the commitment and the survey, if there's any objections that you don't like, let's say for example the commitment comes back and it doesn't allow you to run a business out of here, or for example, let's say also there's a giant tax lien on the commitment that has to be paid and the seller can't pay it, so we could just object to stuff like that. But for the most part, I would say 99% of the time, everything usually comes out clear and positive. If anything does come out negative, or anything comes out that that's kind of out of the ordinary, but we'll definitely let you know. But that's basically in a nutshell what that paragraph is here. As we go here into page 3, the ending of page 2 and beginning of page 3 here just talks about title notices. E2 here talks about if the property is located in an owners association, which is just another word for an HOA. So is the property located in an HOA? Yes or no, or yes it is not. That would be checkbox here if it is or isn't. You are obligated to pay any assessments to the property owners association. The amount of the assessments is subject to change. Your failure to pay the assessments could result in enforcement of the association's lien and the foreclosure of the property. So this is just stating, that the seller is obligated to pay any assessments that are currently due on the property, and you as a buyer, if you're purchasing the buyer, you are also obligated to pay any assessments, once you own the property as well. If you don't pay any of your HOA fees, your homeowner association fees, then the association could potentially, file a lien on the property or even foreclose on the property. Now, that's extremely rare, but this is just a little disclosure that that's possible and that could happen if you don't pay your HOA dues. Most people don't like the HOA dues, but they do quite a bit for the property, for the area, for the subdivision. So they do have quite a bit of positive resources to what to the reason most newer subdivisions use HOAs. A lot of the older subdivisions don't have HOAs, so there's that's definitely a plus if you're looking to purchase an older property with no HOA. Then there's no HOA fees to pay out. But of course, the neighborhood or so, or the area may not look as nice as a brand new neighborhood does because there is no HOA. So just something to keep in mind. Okay, so let's go down here towards. Let's see if we can skip through these two. Again, I would highly recommend you read all this stuff, but this is all information that every every contract has this information. There's nothing here for us to change. Okay, so paragraph 7 here, property conditions. Here's an important one. So if you read paragraph 7A here, says access, inspections, and utilities. Seller shall permit the buyer and buyer's agent to access the property at reasonable times. Buyer may have the property inspected by inspectors selected by a buyer and a licensed by a TREC or otherwise permitted by law to make inspections. Any hydrostatic testing must be separately authorized by the seller in writing. Seller at seller's expense shall immediately cause existing utilities to be turned on and shall keep utilities on during the time of this contract and until this. Keep all utilities on during the time this contract is in effect. So what that basically just states is that the seller is responsible to have the utilities turned on, especially for the buyer to conduct their inspections. And we'll go into a little bit into detail exactly what that is. If you're not familiar, what inspection period is or what an option period is, that's actually towards the end of the contract, and we'll go into a little bit more detail into that here in just a little bit. Okay, so here on 7B, seller disclosure notice. This basically just states if the buyer has received the notice or not. If the buyer has received the notice, then we just simply mark box 1. If the buyer hasn't received the notice, we'll mark box 2, which basically just states that the buyer hasn't received the notice. And within, usually it's 3 days, sometimes it's 5 days, sometimes it's 10 days. But usually it says within 3 days after the effective date of this contract, seller shall deliver the notice to the buyer. Now, the seller disclosure notice is basically just a document that states anything that the seller is aware of that may have any defects. That's a document that's very important to go over. So that document is pretty crucial to having that looked over. Usually, for the most part, you'll receive that document before signing this contract. But if you don't get it before signing the contract, that's why this paragraph is here. That the seller is going to deliver that notice, that seller's disclosure notice, to the buyer within, typically is 3 days, as you see in here. Let's see. Paragraph 7D here, acceptance of property condition. For the most part, 9 out of 10 times, it's always going to be this checkbox 1 here, which says buyer accepts the property as is. We never check box 2 here unless it's a cash transaction. So if you're buying the property cash, if you're a buyer listening to this and you're buying the property with cash money, you're not going to be financing at all. Then you could put in here, different things as far as, for the seller, perhaps to have fixed. And also as well, once we do our inspections, we can always go back and renegotiate if there's any repairs that need to be made. But this is just the initial contract here. And this, you would put here any factual repairs that you want to have done to the property that you're aware of, when you see the house for the very first time. But again, for the most part, 9 out of 10 times, it's always going to be buyer accept the property as is. Again, now we could always, just because the buyer accepts the property as is here in his contract, doesn't mean we can always go back and renegotiate later on, for the seller to conduct any repairs. So just keep that in mind. We'll kind of skip over this here. Lender required repairs and treatments. You could read this on your own, but it's nothing too important. Basically, it just states that the lender requires the seller to make any repairs or treatments. Then neither party is obligated to pay for the lender required repairs. So if the lender says, hey, this property needs a new roof or it needs some foundation, that doesn't require the seller to make those repairs. The seller could simply just decide to terminate the contract. But that's basically what that paragraph is there. So I'm going to skip through those. You can read through those on your own time. Here where it says, here on the very top of page 5, where it says residential service contracts. Most people don't know what this is. This is actually the paragraph for a home warranty. Now, a home warranty is basically, for the most part, usually 12 months. Sometimes they're a little bit longer, but it's a 12-month insurance policy for the most part, basically, where they will cover certain items of the property. For the most part, most home warranty companies are going to cover things such as the electrical, the plumbing, the roof, foundation, the AC and the heat, and most appliances, not all, but most appliances. That is on the contract, it's called a residential service contract, but we also call it a home warranty as well. So that's what that is. Now this amount here, this $500, this could always be a different amount. Sometimes it's $350, sometimes it's $450, sometimes it's $500, sometimes it's more than $500. But this paragraph basically just states that the seller will be paying for the cost of obtaining a home warranty or residential service contract as a seller's expense. Excuse me, as a seller's expense. So so if the seller's going to be providing or paying for a home warranty, aka residential service contract, this is the amount that the seller would pay. And if there's anything exceeding that amount, let's say the seller is going to pay for up to $500 for your home warranty, but your home warranty that you're purchasing is $600, and you're going to have to pay the difference, which will be $100 in that situation. But that's what that paragraph is all about. Broker's fees. This just states that all obligations of the parties for payment of broker's fees are contained in a separate written agreement. So, for the broker's fees, there's a buyer's representation agreement for buyers that are being represented by an agent, and there's another document called a listing agreement that states how much the seller will be paying the listing broker for the fee of being their representative, their real estate agent. Paragraph 9 simply just states when the closing date is going to be. This example is going to be December 31st, 2018. This paragraph just states, what's going to be happening at closing, which basically just says that the seller is going to execute and deliver a general warranty deed conveying title to the property to the buyer and showing no additional exceptions to those permitted in paragraph 6. Buyer shall pay the sales price in good funds acceptable to the escrow agent. Again, you can kind of go and read all this on your own, but for the most part, it's just some verbiage in there to protect you and to protect the buyer and the seller here. But for the most part, this paragraph, it just states when the closing is going to happen, which is in this example December 31st. Make sure you look at the contract that you're going to be signing and see what closing date that's going to fall on, and make sure that closing date falls on the day that you're able to take off work, or ask for work off. So that's something just to keep in mind. Paragraph 10 here, under possession, I'm going to basically boil this down put into a quick nutshell. Possession just basically means whenever the buyer is going to actually take possession of the property, when they're actually going to be able to have their keys and start moving in. In this example, it just states upon closing and funding, the buyer will get possession of the property. If the buyer doesn't get possession upon closing and funding, the other option here is according to a temporary residential lease. So in this example here, if this box was checked, then that will basically just state, for the most part, what that usually means is that the seller is going to be staying in the property a few days after closing. It could be a few days or a few weeks after closing. And usually in that instance, there's going to be a residential lease that would be signed for a few days, basically just allowing the seller to live there for a few extra days. They're typically going to pay the buyer rent for those few days. And the only reason that would happen will be, for example, let's say the seller doesn't have enough time to move out, so they're going to have to rent the property from the new buyer for a few days so that they can move all their stuff out. But for the most part, I would say another 8 to 9, 10, 8, maybe 9 out of 10 times, or 8 out of 10 times, the buyer will always get possession upon closing and funding, which means, once you sign your closing documents at the closing table, in this example will be December 31st. Once it closes and funds, you're going to get your keys and you can move right in, the very next day, or the same day if you want. Okay, so paragraph 11 here is special provisions. This paragraph here is going to be used wherever there's something that needs to be put into the contract that isn't already covered. For the most part, again, 9 out of 10 times, this is always going to be blank. But in case we ever need to type anything in here to add onto the contract, it will be in this little tiny paragraph here. Again, us real estate agents, I'm gonna say 99% of us, we're not attorneys. We're only licensed real estate agents. So what we do, or what we are able to put here, is very limited. And this is something. If there is something in this paragraph here, definitely consult myself or consult an attorney to make sure there's something in here that's going to be hurting you or protecting you. You definitely want to know that. But again, 9 out of 10 times, this paragraph 11 will always be blank as you see it here. I'm going to get a really quick sip of water, real quick. So if you guys don't mind give me a few seconds here. Okay. So paragraph 12, this is going to be the settlement and other expenses paragraph. So basically, in a nutshell, paragraph 12A here, 12A, 12B, this amount is either going to be blank, where there's no amount here at all, or there's going to be a number like this in there. Now, what this is basically, this is going to be seller contributions. So if the seller the seller is going to be contributing some money towards the buyer's closing cost, that amount, whatever that amount is, and in this example, it's $5,000, is going to be stated in this paragraph here, paragraph 12, 12B, 12AB. I'm sorry. So that paragraph will state that the seller is going to be contributing towards the buyer's closing cost. In this situation, is $5,000. And that's basically what that is. There's nothing more to it. It kind of goes into detail exactly what that all means here in this paragraph, but that's in a nutshell what that paragraph is for. Prorations, this is just stating that taxes for the current year, entrance, maintenance, fees, assessments, and dues and rents will be prorated through the closing date. The tax prorations may be calculated, taking into consideration any changes and exemptions that will affect the current year's taxes. So basically, this is just saying that all the figures are going to be prorated for the current year. So, for example, the taxes, maintenance fees, HOA fees, stuff like that. All of those fees, all of those all of those taxes and everything like that is going to be prorated for the current year. Paragraph 14, don't have to really worry about this. It just talks about property damage, or if the property gets destroyed while we're under contract to sell a property or to purchase a property. Again, for the most part, hopefully Hurricane Harvey doesn't happen to us again, and the property doesn't get destroyed while we're under contract to purchase a property. If the property does get destroyed, let's say another Hurricane Harvey comes and hits Houston again while you're under contract to sell your property or to buy this property, then this paragraph just states that the seller is going to be responsible to restore the property to its previous condition before it being destroyed or damaged, or if not, then the buyer has a right to terminate the contract and get their earnest money back. Now, moving on here to paragraph 5, default. This basically just states if the buyer or if the seller fall into default of the property or of the contract, then they may either take the earnest money as liquidated damages, as you see here, releasing both parties from the contract, or the buyer or the seller may enforce specific performance, which basically just means this could go to court if there's a default, a breach in the contract, basically. Mediation, this just states that it is the policy of the state of Texas to encourage resolution of any disputes through alternative dispute resolution procedures such as mediation. If there is any kind of dispute where we're trying to avoid having to go to court, we could go to a mediator to try to resolve any disputes that may be happening between the parties. Throughout my entire career, I've been in real estate now for almost 10 years now. I've never had a single property or client of mine that ever had to go through mediation. So this really never happens. For the most part, people are nice to each other. The buyers and sellers, they're nice to each other, where we don't get into some nasty arguments and have to go to mediation. So don't let this paragraph here scare you, or paragraph 15. Attorney fees. So here in Texas, we don't need an attorney to draft up these contracts or anything like that. You can hire your own attorney if you want to, if you need an attorney to explain to you any legal documents such as this one to yourself. But this basically just states that a buyer and seller, listing broker, or other broker or escrow agent who prevails in any legal proceedings related to this contract is entitled to recover reasonable attorney fees at all costs of such proceedings. So this just talks about attorney fees and how they're going to be paid and things like that. But for the most part, again, there is an attorney involved to draft up the title documents, but you don't necessarily need an attorney in most situations when you're purchasing a property here in Texas. Besides having a title policy prepared, but that's always taken care of by an attorney. Okay, so paragraph 18 just talks about escrow expenses, demand. Again, this is all stuff that I would encourage you to read on your own. Let's see here. Representations. Let's see here. I'm going to take a really quick break and get another sip of water here. I'm going to go ahead and pause this video really quickly, and I'll get right back to where we left off here. Okay, much better now. My throat is really starting to get dried out there. So let's blow this up again. Okay, so we were on representations is where we left off at. Okay, so representations is just stating that the parties are being represented. If there's any representations of the seller or the buyer, which is in most cases always is, there's usually an agent on both sides. This kind of tells you a little bit about that. Federal tax requirements. Let's see here. If the seller is a foreign person as defined by Internal Revenue Code by the IRS, so really this paragraph doesn't even apply to you if you are a U.S. citizen. If you're not a U.S. citizen, then there may be an additional tax that you would have to pay to either sell the property or to purchase a property here in the United States. But if you are a U.S. citizen, then this is a paragraph you don't even have to really worry about. Paragraph 21 here, where it says notices. This is just a paragraph where both sellers are typically going to put an email address here or a phone number. That way we'll know who to send notices from one party to the other. In this situation, we have Snoop Dogg, who is the buyer, and Ice Cube, who is the seller. So we have their fake email addresses here. But that's what that paragraph 21 is for. Paragraph 22 here. So this is just a few boxes here on paragraph 22 that states what additional addendums are added onto this contract. So you have the standard 10-page purchase contract, this 1-to-4 family contract, and then you have these additional addendums that are added on top of this contract. We're going to get into those here in a little bit. But in this example, we have the third-party financing addendum, addendum to property subject to a mandatory membership in a property owner association, which is just a fancy word for an HOA. Then we have addendum concerning the right to terminate due to lender's appraisal. We're going to go into all these addendums here in a little bit here a little bit towards the end of the video. So we'll get into that here in just a few minutes. Paragraph 23, this is the termination option, otherwise, or AKA also known as the inspection period. So some people like to call it the inspection period, but legally here on the contract, it's actually called the termination option paragraph, AKA inspection period. So let's go ahead and dive into this one, because this one is actually a very, very important paragraph. I mean, these are all important paragraphs, but this one is very important to follow. So in this paragraph here, this is a paragraph that allows the buyer who's purchasing the property to have basically in most cases it's 10 days. So take a look at your contract and see if this says 10 days or 7 days or 0 days. It might be 0 in some very, very rare occasions, but for the most part, it's either going to say 7 or 10, sometimes 12, very rarely 14. But for the most part, it's going to be 10 days. So the seller's going to grant the buyer a 10-day window to conduct their inspections. Now, in order to have the buyer granted this 10-day window, the buyer has to pay a fee. So in this situation, it's $100. So it's the buyer's going to pay $100 to the seller to grant the buyer this 10-day window to do their inspections. And during this 10-day window, the buyer will have the unrestricted right to terminate the contract for whatever reason. So that could be, for example, let's say the inspections come back and the property needs a lot more work than what the buyer was expecting. Let's say there's foundation issues and roof issues that the buyer was unaware of when he first made this offer or this contract. During that 10 days, once the buyer has that inspection done and he finds that information out, then the buyer can just simply cancel the contract and he'll get his earnest money refunded back to him. So in this situation, it would be $2,500 in this specific situation because there was $2,500 in earnest money. So that really grants you the unrestricted right to terminate the contract, and that's for any reason. It doesn't have to necessarily be for the inspections. You could nearly just have a change of heart. If you're the buyer, if you just have a change of heart, you no longer like the property, or you found something else that's even better, and you like more than this property, you can cancel the contract for any reason and get your earnest money refunded back to you if you're a buyer. With this paragraph here, with paragraph 23, within this little 10-day window that you see here, again, it grants you the unrestricted right to terminate the contract. And as you can see here down at the bottom, it says time is of the essence for this paragraph, and strict compliance. Excuse me, I need some more water. Time is of the essence for this paragraph, and a strict compliance with the time for performance is required. So some people might be wondering, when does this 10 days actually start? So the 10 days start the day after this contract is signed. So let's say the seller and the buyer signed this contract, let's say on Monday. So Monday will be the execution date, the date of execution that both parties agreed and signed this contract. So let's say, for purposes of just an example, let's say that's going to be December 1st. Let's say December 1st, and that's a Monday. Your termination option will start immediately the very next day. So if your execution date is Monday, December 1st, then day one will be, Tuesday, December 2nd. And that'll be day one. So day one day one doesn't start the day of this contract gets signed. It's the day after. So that basically answers that question in case you were wondering when the 10-day period actually starts. It's the day after the contract is fully signed by both the buyer and the seller. Paragraph 24 basically just states, again, consult an attorney before signing. TREC rules prohibit real estate license holders from giving legal advice. Read this contract carefully. Again, as I mentioned at the very beginning of this video, I'm not a licensed attorney. I don't claim to be, and I don't play to be one. So if there's anything on here that you don't fully understand and you're needing some legal advice to fully grasp the concept of what exactly you're signing here, then definitely consult an attorney. I will definitely try my best to educate you and try to explain exactly whatever questions you might have about certain paragraphs of this contract. But again, if there's anything that you're really unsure of or something that just doesn't feel right, then definitely you're always going to want to consult an attorney before signing this contract, because once you sign this contract, it is a fully binding contract that you're obligated to follow. So that's basically it. So the buyer, which is Snoop Dogg again, would sign here, and the seller, Ice Cube, would sign there. Get a quick drink of water again. Okay, so here in page 9, which basically just says broker information, you don't have to really worry about this page. This is just information that us brokers have to fill out. So typically, I would have my information here, either on the left side here or on the right side here, one or the other, just depending on the transaction. But this basically just states who are the brokers and the real estate agents involved throughout this transaction. But again, this is nothing really too important that you as a buyer or as a seller have to really pay too close attention to. And the same thing for page 10. These are just receipts. So once we have the contract signed, then the title company is going to fill out this little portion here, which is the earnest money receipt. Once the buyer pays their option fee, which in this situation, as we previously just discussed, was $100 here. That will go here, and either the seller or the listing agent would fill this out just as a receipt, noting that they received that $100. Again, when you see this contract, these are all going to be blank anyways, so you really don't have to worry about these. Okay, so now we're going to our first addendum here. So this is called the third party financing addendum. Now, if the buyer is paying cash and this is a cash transaction, then this, of course, this addendum wouldn't be included. But if the buyer is financing, they're getting, whatever type of financing that might be, this is always going to be added as an addendum to the contract here. So let's go over this addendum here and go over this example. So as mentioned at the beginning of this video, in our example here, Snoop Dogg is the one who's buying this property, and he's getting a 5% down. He's putting a 5% down payment on his financing as a conventional loan. So if the buyer is purchasing the property as a conventional loan, then checkbox 1 would be here. If this is a Texas Veterans loan, a VA loan, then that would be checkbox 2. If this is an FHA loan, then it would be checkbox 3 here that the buyer is using FHA financing, and so on and so on. There's a few different financing options down here as well. We're just going to go over here the conventional financing one. Most of these are all going to be fairly similar as well. Excuse me. The conventional financing that you see here, let's see here. So it's pretty straightforward. As you can see, the mortgage loan amount, or the principal amount in this example, is going to be $237,500. And this example is going to be due in full in 30 years with interest not to exceed 5% for the first 30 years of the loan, and the buyer's loan estimate not to exceed 1% of the loan. Your loan officer will let you know what type of financing. If you're a buyer listening to this, we'll let you know what type of financing you're going to be able to purchase a property with. So this paragraph just describes exactly which type of financing the buyer purchasing the property would be using to fund the property here. Page 2 of the third-party financing addendum. This basically just states that the approval financing the buyer. This contract is contingent upon the buyer being approved for financing. This contract is subject to the buyer obtaining buyer approval. If the buyer cannot attain buyer approval, buyer may give written notice to the seller within 25 days after the effective date of this contract, and this contract will terminate, and the earnest money will be refunded to the buyer. So what this paragraph states is simply, if the buyer is unable to get their financing, let's say their financing falls through for whatever reason, they will be able to notify the seller that they weren't able to obtain their financing. And as long as that falls within 25 days after this contract was signed, then the buyer will be refunded their earnest money, which in this example, again, is $2,500, that full earnest money amount. Now, let's say on this contract has 25 days, but let's say the buyer finds out on day 26 that he can't get financing approval, and he's already out of this 25-day requirement. Then the buyer in that situation would not be able to get his earnest money refunded back to him in that situation. So pay very close attention to what this paragraph is here, paragraph B1 of the third-party financing addendum, and make sure you know exactly how many days you have in here for the buyer to obtain financing approval. For the most part, it's usually going to be 21 days or 25 days, which should give the buyer enough time. But again, if the buyer falls out of those days, then they could potentially lose their earnest money in that situation. I'm going to go ahead and skip through most of the verbiage here. If you have any questions about the verbiage here, for example, like this FHA VA required provision, please let me know. But for the most part, this is just information here regarding having the property appraised and meet the appraisal value and things of that nature. But we could go into that further detail if you're getting an FHA loan. And if you have any questions about that paragraph, please just let me know. Okay, moving on here to the next addendum here. Now, this addendum will be used if there is an HOA. So there's an HOA. We'll use this addendum here. As you can see here, we're at 123 Fake Street, and this is the Compton HOA, and it will state the HOA phone number as well. This basically just gives us a couple of different options here, a couple of boxes to go by. In this example, we have within 20 days after the effective date of this contract, seller shall obtain and pay for and deliver the subdivision information to the buyer. this other paragraph just basically just say that the buyer will obtain and pay for it. Or paragraph 4 here says the buyer doesn't require delivery to subdivision information. This is just information of the subdivision. So if the property is located in an HOA, then this information is basically just the bylaws and the rules and the regulation of the subdivision. And this paragraph just states who's going to actually pay to have that information delivered to the buyer. You're not always going to see this addendum here, but this is the addendum concerning the right to terminate due to lender's appraisal. If you're a buyer, or if the buyer is purchasing this property with an FHA loan or a VA loan, then you're not going to see this paragraph. But if it's a conventional financing, if the buyer's purchasing the property with conventional financing, then you might see this addendum here. And this addendum basically just protects the buyer. In most situations, checkbox 3 will be checked here, which basically just states, in addition to the buyer's right to terminate under paragraph B2, buyer may terminate the contract within 21 days after the effective date if the opinion of the value in the lender's appraisal is less than $250,000. So in this example here, like we mentioned before, the purchase price in this example was $250,000. If we have an appraisal done on the property, and the appraiser comes back and says the property is only worth, $240,000 and not $250,000, within 21 days, then we have a few things that could happen. Either the buyer could terminate the contract, as it says here, the buyer would have the right to terminate it and get his earnest money back, or the seller would have to reduce the price in order to meet that appraisal of $240,000. Or if the buyer really wants a property, then he would have to come up with the additional $10,000 to buy this property. But what this paragraph does do is it protects the buyer from an appraisal that's less than what the property is under contract for, if that makes sense. So if the buyer's appraisal comes back lower than what we're under contract for, then the buyer has a right to terminate the contract and get his earnest money back if the seller doesn't agree to either reduce his price, or if the buyer is unable to bring the extra additional funds to closing in order to meet that appraisal that was conducted by the buyer's lender. If you have any questions about that paragraph or this entire addendum, again, as previously stated with the other addendums as well, just please let me know. I could go into further details exactly and what your specific situation may be is to kind of further explain what how that works. But in a nutshell, that's basically what that paragraph and what this addendum here what that means. So in this notice to purchase of a real property in a water district, I left this blank because this is, we don't have to fill this out right now. But if the property is located in a water district, in a utility district, then you would see this addendum here. If you're buying, if you're buying the property within the city, for the most part, like let's say for example within Harris County, and you're buying it, closer to the city, then most of the time you're not going to have a water district. But if you're buying out in the suburbs, for example, let's say, Pearland, Cypress, Pasadena, all those areas, Missouri City, Sugar Land, Spring, Woodlands. If you're buying in those areas, for the most part, most of them have utility districts or water districts, and this is just a notice, a disclosure letting you know that there is a water district, and there's usually an additional tax on that water district that's added to your property taxes to pay for that water district, that utility district. So that's what this notice is. So again, if you're purchasing a property within the city, for the most part, you don't have a utility district or a water district. If you're purchasing a property that's outside of the city limits and you're out in the suburbs, then you may be purchasing a property that's within a water district. Don't let that scare you. All they do is they'll simply add a slightly higher tax to your property taxes to cover that water district. If you have any questions about that, of course, again, please let me know. Okay, so we're almost done here. I know I've been talking for quite a while. My mouth is getting pretty dry, but we're really getting here towards the very, very end of the video here. This is the non-realty items addendum. We will use this addendum in case there's any items that the seller or the buyer wants to either purchase or to have included into the contract. So for example, sometimes we may include items here such as a refrigerator. So if the buyer is asking for the refrigerator, or if the seller's voluntarily leaving the refrigerator with the property, since it's not since the refrigerator is not considered part of the property itself, then we will have to list that into this paragraph here as a realty item. Another example is if the seller is going to be leaving any furniture, or if the buyer agrees to purchase any furniture from the seller, then we will have that stated in this paragraph here as a non-realty item. Basically, it just adds those items to the purchase of this contract. All right, so we made it to the very last page here. So this is the addendum for the seller's disclosure of information on lead-based paint. So for the most part, if you're buying a property or if you're selling a property that was built before 1978, then you won't even see this disclosure because this disclosure won't apply to you. But if you're buying a little bit of an older home that was built prior to 1978, then there's a possibility that the paint has some lead in the paint. Before 1978, paint companies, some of them had some lead that they use in their paint materials or in the paint. So there's a possibility that there could be some lead. You could have a lead-based paint test done with the property, and that's going to reflect this here. So depending on what boxes are checked, but here if you look at box C here, buyer's rights, it will either be checked. There will be one or the other. It will either be one or two. We're going to start with one first, and one just basically just states that the buyer waives the opportunity to conduct a risk assessment or inspection of the property for the presence of lead-based paint. Checkbox 2 basically just states that within 10 days after the effective date of the contract, buyer may have the property inspected by inspectors selected by the buyer. If lead-based paint is present, then the buyer may terminate the contract by giving the seller written notice within 14 days after the effective date of this contract. So if there is any lead in the property, then you could have first of all, you could have the property tested for lead within the paint, and if it does come back that there is lead in there, and you don't feel comfortable moving forward, you could cancel the contract and get your earnest money back if you're a buyer listening to this right now. But for the most part, most buyers, in my experience, most buyers don't actually go out of their way to actually have this testing conducted. If the seller's aware of there's any lead in the property, then they will definitely let us know. If not, then you could definitely have it done. There's no issues with having that done, but just keep in mind as a buyer that is an additional expense that you would have to pay to have that lead-based paint done on the property. So that's that. We just went over this entire contract here. Again, I didn't go word for word. That would take way too long and probably multiple hours. But hopefully that kind of gives you a better understanding of the 1 to 4 family residential contract. If you do have any questions, again, please let me know. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions that you may have. If I don't know the answer to your question regarding this contract or any special paragraphs or words or phrases here, then I could definitely refer you to an attorney. But for the most part, I'll be more than happy and we'll be able to answer just about any question or mostly all questions that you may have about the contract. So please feel free to reach out to me. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me. If you want to make this a little bit smaller, you could always go to my website as well. If you want to schedule some time to speak to me about anything, you can always go to randycanales.com. And as you see here on the top right-hand corner, if you're looking at this on a desktop, you'll see a Let's Meet button here in yellow. You would just click on that, and that'll take you right over to my calendar, to my scheduler. And you could see here there's a schedule a 20-minute strategy call. You could click on that and just simply select the day and time that works best for you to do a quick schedule a quick call and discuss your options, or if you have any questions, please feel free to call me and let me know, and I'll be more than happy to answer those questions. You could call me, you could text me. You don't necessarily have to schedule a time to speak with me. This is just more of a courtesy, but you can always feel free to call me anytime or text me anytime you have any questions, and I'll look forward to working with you guys soon. Take care. Bye-bye.